welcome to our final speaker, who is Sam Bell, and he is running for the Rhode Island Senate from District 5. He is one of Rhode Island's leading progressive activists and has spent the last 6 years fighting for common sense democratic reforms. He has pushed for smarter gun safety laws since the Newtown tragedy and helped expose the NRA's illegal scheme to funnel national money into Rhode Island elections. We know firsthand of Sam's political experience as he served on Indivisible Rhode Island's advisory board until he announced his candidacy. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much. I have to tell you, I remember when the Indivisible movement first started, people always said, is this going to last? Will we maintain the resistance? Will we maintain the energy? And I'm so excited to see so many people still out here today fighting for America. So my story is pretty similar to, I think, a lot of yours. I first got involved in politics. I was horrified what was happening at the national level. I was really upset with the Tea Party. You know, my mother raised me to be a Democrat, to know that everyone in this country should have an equal shot. We should treat people fairly and equally, and we should care about every American. And I was worried because I saw that vision slipping away at the national level as people fought against Obama and tried to undermine his agenda with what I thought were some pretty horrifying ideas. But then I found out what was happening in Rhode Island, and I was flabbergasted. I mean, we are supposed to be a democratic state. And you know, the first thing that really shocked me was gun safety. You know, after Newtown, I thought, that was horrifying. I mean, we saw 21st graders gunned down in our neighboring state, and here in Rhode Island, we don't have an assault weapons ban. At that point, we didn't have any implementation of background checks. We don't have a high-capacity magazine ban. Our gun laws are a mess. We need to do something about this. So I was part of the group of volunteer activists who first started gun control movement here in Rhode Island, and we got completely and utterly crushed that first legislative session. And we were sitting around thinking about why, in a democratic state, in a state this blue, I remember Rachel Maddow said when the gun bills were introduced in Rhode Island that they will almost certainly pass because Rhode Island's legislature is so overwhelmingly Democratic. And she was wrong. So we were sitting around thinking about why. We always came back to all the money the NRA had been funneling into the top Democrats in Rhode Island. And so I did an investigation. It turns out it was all being funneled in illegally from the national level. We got it shut down, got the NRA slapped with the second highest fine in state history. And since then we've been able to move forwards a little bit, including passing a bill to take guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, and that's great, but we need to do more. Rhode Island should have an assault weapons ban. Rhode Island honestly needs a fully implemented background check system, and the NRA-led implementation of our background check system with its, quote, very narrow standard that keeps most people out of the background check system is a disgrace. This is one of the most effective tools, and we need to implement it here in Rhode Island fully. You know, I remember I once went to a fundraiser when I was young and naive, and I still didn't fully realize just how bad it gets in Rhode Island. It was in the middle of the gun debates. I went to a fundraiser for Kathy Cool-Rumsey, who was a Democratic state senator. One of the first campaigns I ever worked on when she unseated the Republican ALEC chair in the swingy South County seat. I remember going to the fundraiser and seeing all these men in suits with their big yellow gun control doesn't work buttons. And I was young and I was naive, and I asked her, you know, my goodness, there are a lot of NRA lobbyists here. And she laughed and she looked at me and she said, no, those are all state senators. And that's what we're up against here in Rhode Island. You know, and it's not just when it comes to guns, you know, where we have the top Democrats in both the House and the Senate with A+ ratings in the NRA. A woman's right to choose. You know, top Democrats in both the House and the Senate are endorsed by Right to Life. Most of the Democrats in the state Senate are endorsed by Right to Life, including the guy I'm running against. And these are common, basic, core democratic values that we shouldn't be fighting about within the Democratic Party in a state this blue. But I'll tell you, one lesson I learned from the gunfight is that when you take on the machine, often you can win. And I've learned that time and time again here in Rhode Island. The machine is not that powerful. They exist because we haven't beaten them yet. But we can. You know, I remember with when they wanted to move McCoy Stadium to the planned downtown Providence waterfront park. I helped lead the Stop the Stadium Deal campaign, and everyone told us that we had no chance of winning, but we won. We knocked on doors in the House Speaker's district, we gathered signatures in Armory Park, and most importantly, we kept it in the news for months. And one of the things that I took away from that was the knowledge that we can beat the machine, even when people know that there's a lot of money on the line backed by a lot of developers who are interested in spending a lot of money inside the machine, which really is what they tend to care most about. And you can beat them on those issues. The fight that I think that we need to take on, the fight that I'm running to take on, the most important fight is the fight to resist the Trump agenda here in Rhode Island. When we talk about the Trump agenda, I'm talking about what he did at the national level, what he has fought for, what he has done, and that has been what we have implemented here. You know, the first thing he tried to do at the national level was to slash Medicaid by repealing Obamacare. And here in Rhode Island, we have cut Medicaid year after year after year, budget after budget, and it's been the most heartbreaking stories I've heard from constituents. You know, I met a woman who's kicked off Medicaid in the middle of her cancer treatment. She now has to pay $30,000. She's worried about losing her home. I meet so many people who've been affected by this cruel policy, who are worried about whether they can fund their health care. And I just think it's wrong. It's easy to have wealthy politicians vote to take away health care from people who don't have as much, but I do not think it's right. And you know, the second thing Trump did at the national level in terms of really big policy things where unfortunately we didn't defeat him was the tax cuts for the rich. But here in Rhode Island, at the state level, we have cut taxes for the rich by more than any state in America except for North Dakota. And they said it would all trickle down and get all this magic revenue. Didn't happen. Instead, all we got was more than a decade of just budget crisis after budget crisis after budget crisis. And they cut so many important programs that helped so many families. One of the most important things they cut was the budget of cities like Providence, Warwick, Pawtucket, that turn around and raise property taxes, especially through the car tax. So most people in the state wound up paying more, so the wealthiest people could pay less, and I just think that that's unfair. And you know, another part of the Trump agenda that I think a lot about, I've thought a lot about more as I've watched the Mueller investigation unfold, has been our policies around big developers. And that's where Trump got his start. He got his start as a wealthy developer working to keep out people of color and to get a lot of state subsidies. The degree to which luxury development is mismanaged by the public in Rhode Island has shocked me. And it's one of the things I've learned more and more about. Here in Rhode Island, in most states, most blue states, you want to build a big high-end development, you have to put in a couple of affordable units because we've decided as a country, as a party, that we don't want development to be segregated. We want our cities to be integrated racially and economically, so you can't just build these big pure luxury developments. Most blue cities have banned this, not Providence. So we build all these high-end developments in Providence that are all segregated. And yet we also subsidize them. And one of the craziest things, you go to a normal state and you have subsidy policy, sure. Plenty of states invest in affordable housing. Massachusetts spends more than 10 times what we do per capita on affordable housing. And we got a real affordable housing crisis in our neighborhoods. People are worried about getting forced out. The rent is going through the roof. And yet where are we subsidizing? We're subsidizing high-end luxury development. And I just don't think it's right. One of the many issues I disagree with the incumbent on in this race, in addition to his piece on a woman's right to choose, his votes to cut Medicaid, his bill to cut taxes for the rich even more, is the bill he co-sponsored that forced Providence to subsidize all the luxury development on the I-95. Because so much of what I've heard from so many of my constituents have been about broken and failed city services, roads falling apart, schools that are crumbling, taxes that are going up on people who don't have that much, and people who are worried that they'll never see the city pensions they worked their lives for. And there is money in the city budget but the money has been taken in state mandates, forced by, including Providence state senators, who have voted to force Providence to subsidize luxury development. And not a penny of that goes to affordable development. And I think when you talk about the budget of the city, which is such a concern for so many people I meet, we can say we don't have to spend all this money subsidizing luxury development, and we can allow Providence to make its own decisions. We don't have to force these mandates from the state. And I do believe this is part of the Trump agenda. This is what Trump spent most of his life fighting for, is policies like these, and I do believe it's time that we stand up to the wealthy developers, make sure that they don't steal all our money, and that they provide affordable and integrated housing. And the final issue, that I've heard that really means a lot to me, part of the Trump agenda, of course, has been the horrifying legacy of racism, particularly when it comes to immigration. My grandfather was a Holocaust refugee, and his family couldn't leave Germany legally, had to break all sorts of laws. And if they hadn't, they would have died. And we have so many neighbors here who live in very similar circumstances, but now live in fear of deportation, because here in Rhode Island, we do not do enough to protect people who don't have documentation. We're not a sanctuary state. Our state agencies continue to deport people all the time. They maintain databases of undocumented immigrants. We've refused to provide driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants, many of whom drive on our roads without insurance. Our policies around this area are very cruel, and we need to do more to protect our neighbors in the undocumented community, and that's very important to me. So that's why I'm running. I do believe that we need to resist the Trump agenda here in Rhode Island, and that does mean we have to stand up to the political machine that has been running our state and implementing these Trump policies. And so that's why I'm running. I think it's time that we stand up here in Rhode Island and resist these same policies at the state level. Could I take some questions? Yeah.
How do you combat all of this money with all these wonderful ideas? Does the money in this whole system overwhelm and crush people?
Well, first of all, in Rhode Island, a lot of the money that has the most influence is all illegal. And so one of the great tools we have is to expose illegal financial schemes, which is honestly most of the money that flows and affects politics in Rhode Island does it in ways that are not legal. And so that is one of the biggest tools that we have, and one of the places where we need to do more work is to expose all of these illegal funding schemes. And I could talk about this for days, but I do believe that that is the biggest tool we have. And some that are not illegal are openly unethical. And when you expose them, when you talk about them, you can really change the influence that they have.
But where can we find out about what is going on? I mean, where is it publicized where we can actually see what horrific
This
things
is
are
a
happening?
fantastic question. I gave a speech at an Indivisible event, the Rally for Truth, about the media in Rhode Island, which is something that we don't talk about enough. Our media, it's really scary what's happening to our media. I mean, you should read Uprise RI, but Steve... Unfortunately, there is only one Steve, and he can only do so much. But, yeah, it's a real problem, especially if you want to know something complex that requires a reporter to really devote a lot of time and energy into understanding and then into writing about. All the time I'll hear from reporters, that you talk to them about stories that, yeah, it's an important story, but they don't have the time to run it. If it's at the Projo, they'll tell you that the third floor wouldn't wear it, that you can't run this story. I remember a story I did about illegal campaign finance activity for the Providence School Board chairman, who distinguished himself by endorsing a Republican for president. And the law firm that he works at, which is the main lobbying law firm that advocates for the problematic nightclubs brought before the Board of Licenses and the big developers in Providence asking for city subsidies. So, it's a big part of Providence politics. but the Pro-Jo refused to run the story because the editors at the third floor asked it after the journalist had written about it. And so it's a big problem. We don't have enough media, and honestly, a lot of the worst stuff that goes on because it hasn't been exposed, and everyone knows about it, but no one has actually written it up. And it's a really big problem.
What about apps, a comedian show? I mean, but comedians have the ability to make people laugh, but
Yeah.
to give the information. So is there a local app or a podcast or some way that would go as say, well, you know, it's all laughing fun, but here's what we found.
One of the things that we most need to do in the real democratic movement here in Rhode Island is to build out our movement so we have things like this. You know, we have our own version of John Oliver or something like that, which would make a huge difference. And one of the things that I've noticed is that because in Rhode Island we don't have anything close to a liberal media, a lot of people who are Democrats don't engage in the local media because all the local media is so right-wing. A lot of Democrats are not going to listen to WPRO. A lot of Democrats won't read the Pro-Jo anymore. A lot of Democrats won't watch Channel 10, which is owned by Sinclair Media. So where do you get your local news? And so one of the things that often it's the case, the conservatives, often it's the case the conservatives are more informed about local politics because all the media here is conservative. And it's a really, really big problem. And I'm not sure what we do about it, but one of the few things we can do is to support the good journalists who are doing the good work and do everything we can to help them. Yes,
Sam,
Carol.
I want to understand a little bit more about the developers. Because
Yes.
I live in East Providence.
Yes.
And East Providence coastline
Mm-hmm.
has basically been given away to developers who promised that 10% of what they built would be for low-income people. And a couple of months ago, they went to the city council and asked for permission not to do that. And they got permission not to do that. And there was a lot of a hullabaloo about that. People objected to it, and they just didn't feel like there was any way to counteract that. So am I hearing you say that the only real way to counteract that is at the state legislature level?
Effectively, yes. Municipal politics in Rhode Island is shockingly and horrifyingly broken. I mean, if you think the state is bad, every municipality has its own unique set of reasons why it is bad and why the municipal government. But one of the things that has happened, because we just haven't had a strong democratic movement in Rhode Island, is at the municipal level is where the machine is strongest. And often, because Democrats have entirely refused to fund municipal campaigns, plenty of cities that are eminently Democratic, Cranston is a classic example, don't have Democratic governments, so have openly and explicitly Republican governments. And so the municipal government of Rhode Island is a nightmare and involves some of the most horrifying policies. And when you look at the real pain, the worst effects of our policy agenda in Rhode Island, so much of it has happened at the municipal level. Whether it's the schools falling apart, the roads crumbling, what happens with all of the workers who work their whole lives and see their pensions wiped away, all of these things that happen at the municipal level are some of the most heart-wrenching, and honestly some of the things that I hear the worst stories from constituents about. So we need to take back our municipal governments, but that's a tough and longer fight. Rhode Island has essentially gutted all municipal protections that exist in the state constitution. So effectively the state can ride all over municipalities whenever it wants to. There was a big Supreme Court case when the Warwick Mall sued when the state passed a law saying the Providence Place Mall wouldn't pay property taxes effectively. And the Supreme Court, which is an all-Republican institution in Rhode Island, because every justice is appointed by a Republican governor, ruled that, you can totally do that through a bunch of legal creativity by the ex-Supreme Court justice who's now running in Sheldon White House. State law is incredibly powerful here, and many states, and so I believe that the best solution to these municipal governance problems comes from the state level. So when it comes to requiring affordable housing, I think that works best statewide. I think it's easier to do statewide. We need to fight it at the local level. But so much of local government is so badly broken in Rhode Island that it is important that we fix a lot of local problems from the state level. Any more questions, or do you want?
We have time for maybe one quickie.
Yes.
Hi, Sam. It's really just a comment, but I appreciate a forum in which I can make this comment. I am so thrilled to hear you say that Trumpism is a driver for you. And the reason I'm thrilled is because, obviously it is for all of us, but more importantly because so many people who are progressives and who are activists have told me since the election that we have to work on the state level. We can't worry about the national level. And I disagree with that. That energy and that anger and that disagreement that we have with what's happening at the national level always has to drive us. And it can inform everything that we do from the local level all the way up. So you're one of the few people that I have heard who has said that you are motivated for that reason, and I really appreciate it, rather than hearing people tell me to tamp down my dissatisfaction with the current president.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think it's very important. I think this is the same agenda. These are the same policies that we're fighting at the local level,
Yes.
the state level, that we're fighting at the national level. And so I do believe we should talk about the Trump agenda here in Rhode Island. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. But when it comes to the machine here in Rhode Island, one thing we never touch is their open and explicit embracement of Trump all the time. And this is one of the things, there's a Democratic state representative from a district that Hillary Clinton won, I think was 70% of the vote, who went to Trump's rally and so far doesn't have a primary challenger. We have a House Speaker who said that Rhode Island, quote, should be supportive of Trump, who passed a resolution to the House praising Trump and refused to allow a vote record on it. Just passed it on a voice vote, so nobody knows who voted for it, because they felt it was so important to force through a resolution praising Trump, and they didn't feel like it was a... Oh yes, this happened. Beginning of 2017, one of the first actions of the Rhode Island House of Representatives was to force through a resolution praising Trump, and they did not record the vote. It was a voice vote, and so nobody knows who voted for it. At some point, I'd like to poll, some journalist should poll the House of Representatives and see who will say that they voted for it. And see.
I was in the room and no one would admit.
No one will admit to it,
Right.
but you listen to the tape and you can hear a chorus of yeses, and no one will admit. I once.
I'll go further if I may. The tape gives the yeses, but then it goes not silent. Somebody hit a suppressor for anybody who might have said anything after that for a few seconds.
Oh, really?
So the audio drops out for a few seconds after the yeas.
And
And that you can look at. You could go to the file now, download it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's right there. Yeah.
a Republican state representative once told me last election that he had personally identified 17 members, the Democratic members of the Rhode Island House of Representatives, who had told him that they were voting for Trump. I mean, so like this is the same agenda that we are fighting. I mean, I once debated a Woonsocket, Democratic Woonsocket City Council man, a former Democratic state representative, on the topic of Confederate statues, in which, in addition to praising the Confederacy, he told me that he still supported Donald Trump in language that is too colorful for me to repeat here. But yeah, it's the same fight, and we can't shy away from it. I think it's really important that we expose what's going on here in Rhode Island for what it is, and we cannot shy away from our fight against Trump. People will tell us that we need to be quiet, that we need to focus on other things. No.